All right, hello everybody. Can everybody hear me? Is this good volume? Awesome. Thank you so much for coming out tonight to our Politics in a Pint here at O'Connell's. My name is Katie Tillman, and I'm one of the student coordinators for the Eugene J. McCarthy Center, and we host events like this throughout the year to help students engage with current political issues of the day. And we're thrilled that you all came out tonight to talk about women in politics. And I just want to quick introduce our wonderful panel. We have Katie Zarowski, Senator Tarryl Clark, Bridget Cummings, Commissioner Sivarajah, and Ashley Bukowski. And the whole discussion tonight is going to be moderated by political science professor, let me awkwardly position myself, Claire Haeg. And so we're going to start with, yeah, Anne, you can clap, go ahead. Let's clap for our panel. So all of our speakers have prepared some brief remarks on how they relate to women in politics, and then we're going to open it up for some audience questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to whoever would like to start.
Commissioner, you go ahead.
Okay. Just to give you a little background about myself, I was born and raised in the rural Cambridge area, oldest of 3 girls. I have been on the County Board of Commissioners since 2003. First ran for office because I was a frustrated taxpayer. I had no political experience whatsoever and decided to jump into an open county commissioner seat. And there were 9 of us that were running and ultimately made it through victorious. And I have been on the county board now since, like I said, 2003, became chair of the county board in 2011. And now I am running for Congress for Michelle Bachmann's seat in the 6th Congressional District.
So my name's Tarryl Clark. I've had the pleasure of having 3 Johnnies in my family, and I consider myself to be, I guess, a Benny Johnny. The joke in my household is I need to take a class at the Sons because I only have sons. My husband Doug went here, our son Colin went both to the prep school. I graduated from here and spent much more of his time on this campus than the other one, and our son Nate got a chance to be here as well as some other places. I definitely want to thank you first and foremost for the pizza. I did say early on I was going to mention that I was disappointed in the lack of pints, so I'm saying that as an advocate. First and foremost an advocate. My husband Doug and I, like I said, he went to college here. We actually moved here from Arizona. I've lived in 2 border states on the opposite sides of the country. We moved here 26 years ago. We wanted to live in a place that we thought would be a great place to raise kids. Central Minnesota, and Minnesota is absolutely that. I grew up in a Republican family. My grandmother was very active as an election judge, among other things. Civic engagement, our faith, family, and community was really important to our family. So it was never an option not to be involved in some way. And I never really thought I would be involved in larger P politics, but I started out working with counseling at-risk teenagers and their families, and I kept seeing system issues that would stop them along the way. And I got frustrated, and I started working with other people about how do we fix that problem, and eventually went to law school because I thought I need some tools to get the laws changed, and then went and advocated to change laws. And eventually I got worn down and I did run for office. It was truly something I wasn't going to do. So a quick question I have is, how many of you ever thought about running for office? I'm hoping by the end of this you're going to have a lot more of them. I'm not alone, like many women, and we'll get a chance to talk about that. But I ended up in large part running because I spent a lot of time helping empower low-income families and strengthening communities and working with college students to say, yes, we can change things. So part of my goal tonight is to help you believe that, yes, you can make a difference, and yes, you should run for office. But I ran for the Senate. It took me more than once. I ran against somebody that nobody was mad at and just said, look, this wasn't about him. But it was about, I thought I had something else that I could help make a difference for our family and community. And then I did end up, I won the state Senate in a special election. I won a leadership position in the Senate just 11 months later, and I was in that position for 4 years. And then I actually ran for Congress against Congresswoman Bachmann in the most expensive race anywhere in the country, and I can tell you, you shouldn't be spending that kind of money. So I've had a variety of experiences. We'll get a chance to talk some more about that, but I'm very excited to be here.
Are we having a problem with the mic? Do you want them to push the mics closer? Having
I
problems?
must pull them out.
Yes. If you could all bring them a little closer, that'd be great. Yeah.
So testing, I'm betting that's a lot better.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so we start with, who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm Ashley Bukuski, and I am the chair of the College Republicans here. And I first got involved with the club was really because as I started learning about politics, I wasn't necessarily happy with what was going on in the country at the time. And I started learning more about the Republican Party, and I really liked their ideas of fiscal responsibility and personal liberties. And so that's what first drew me to here. And I think that really resonates over to their stances on many issues. And our stance on women is much like their stance on men. They don't necessarily have a stance. We really like to focus on personal liberties and fiscal responsibility.
All right, I'm Bridget Cummings. I'm studying political science and economics here, and I am the co-chair of College Democrats with Kyle Smith for St. John's. And I got involved in the club my first year and ran for chair my second year. There's always kind of been women in the leadership positions in our club. We actually had 3 women chairs during the presidential election in 2012. And then we've always had a woman leader since I've been here. So I'm really excited that all of you guys came out here tonight, and yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Katie, and I am the president of SFCT. So for those of you who don't know, SFCT is sort of like the right-wing club that isn't associated with the party, so we try to represent kind of the broader spectrum. But when I first started SFCT, it was definitely a boys' club, and it was kind of intimidating to even go to the meetings. So one thing that I really tried to do is make it a little bit more female-friendly. So at like involvement, we focused on female recruitment and really tried to not push certain issues. So I think that that was really important. And I mean, one thing that I do want to say too is that it's kind of hard to be a conservative woman because there aren't that many of us. It's like a lot more common for women to be more left. So it's kind of funny because I get simultaneously told that I am bad for women because of certain political stances, but also that I'm not conservative enough because of others. But really, like, the message that I want to bring across is that it's important for women to be in politics regardless of what party you identify with. And that's something that I've really tried to focus on here at St. Ben's, and I actually wrote my thesis on women in Congress and why women do and don't run. So, yeah.
For each of you. I have a question about to the 3 students first. Have any of the 3 of you thought about running for office and come up with a yes? Anyone?
It's definitely crossed my mind. You know, I'm open to a lot of different things in my future, but it has crossed my mind about running.
What about you, Katie?
I've thought about it, but I don't think that that's going to happen. I think I have a little bit different career path in mind, but I mean, who knows, maybe later on.
Okay. And Ashley?
Yeah, I think much like Bridget, it's definitely crossed my mind a few times, and we'll see what happens in the future.
All right. All right. I'd like to ask the commissioner, why don't you think women run for elected office?
Well, I think that women generally have more of an attitude that they need to be asked or someone needs to encourage them to run, where a lot of times I think men think, hey, you know, I should run, and they just jump right in, and sometimes they have maybe a greater confidence level to be able to do that. I also think that many times women look at just the negativity in politics and a little more risk averse. They also have other things to think about. I know for me, when I first decided to run for office, my first consideration was, is this going to work for my family life? And I sat down with a woman who was serving in office and asked her specifically about whether or not that worked with her family life and how you could make that work. So I think that that really is what plays a part in why women don't run for office.
So we're all thinking we speak loud enough, but I guess that's not the case. So we have to speak right into the mic, I guess. Yeah. So, Tarryl, do you have a response to that?
Well, building off that, because I certainly think that those are important things. I don't know how many of you are familiar with, or what do I need to do to not have feedback? scoot up. Dee Dee Myers, she's President Clinton's former spokesperson. She wrote a book in the last few years called Why Women Should Rule the World. And she has actually some pretty interesting examples that we could give along the way. But building off of your example, let's say you're told there's 5 traits that you should have to run for office, to be qualified, skills, experiences, whatever. A woman might look at it and say, well, I've got 4 of those. If I work hard in another 4 to 8 years, maybe I'll be qualified to do this. The guy will look at it, and this happens in other parts of life too, and say, well, I've got 1 or 2 of them. Let's go. And, there are sometimes different reasons. There's lots of incredible people across all spectrums that are in office, and so lots of people want to make a difference, but a lot of the times women are really trying to figure out, how can I improve things? It's not really about prestige, it's not about a promotion, it's how do I go help solve these problems? And the way the process often works in many kinds of situations, not in all, but let's just say legislative bodies for a second, although it's true in others, is that for a long, long time, it's really been about win-lose. It's been about yes, no. It's been about I got mine, you didn't get yours. And women tend to work more collaboratively and are looking at how can we bring people together. And in this polarized environment, that's become harder and harder, I think, sometimes for that to happen.
Thank you. I'd like to see if I can get questions from the congregation, let's call it. So does anyone have any questions?
Oh, Tyler Brown has a question.
Imagine that. So I have a question for our women on the right. I'm wondering if you think what are the challenges? And I think Katie kind of got this a little bit. What are the unique challenges being a Republican woman? What challenges do you face? Do you think from those on the left and from those on the right?
Well, I guess I think that one of the things that I see is just the media bias. When it's a woman running, they're very focused on, well, boy, her hair looks terrible today, and look at what she's wearing. They're not focused on what she's actually accomplished. And I think for conservative women, we have to prove ourselves that much more. And I've seen that on the county board. I see that in the current race where I have a whole list of accomplishments, and to be able to put that up against somebody else who maybe doesn't, people sometimes look at, are you strong enough? Are you tough enough? And they just make that natural assumption that a Republican woman, if she comes across as tough, then they may say that maybe she's a little too aggressive. And so I think there's lots of challenges that we face with that.
Yeah, I agree with a lot what Katie said. Stereotypically, I think it almost seems like women are supposed to be liberal. And a lot of people almost look at you like you're almost a sellout to your gender if you do vote Republican or vote right. And so I think the challenge is just explaining to lots of different people, no, it's okay to be Republican, it's okay to think differently than a lot of the other majority on these issues. And I think it's just an educational process.
I've actually flat out been told, how can you as a woman believe that? And I don't think that that's okay, because I think that really what we need to realize is that women, just like men, can believe whatever they want to. But I think that that's kind of a unique challenge to being a right-winged woman.
Could I just add one more thing? I think one of the things that is challenging for conservative women as well is that there's always an assumption made that you must be cold and cruel and not have a heart. And really, I started off at the county working in the economic assistance department where people were coming in and applying for public assistance. Not an easy place to work. But I look at Republican women as being incredibly caring and wanting to make sure that everybody succeeds, that we're really giving people that ability to be self-sufficient, that ability to reach their full potential. Same within the whole realm of disabilities, in that I was visiting with a gentleman the other day who had cerebral palsy, and he said, what do you think about people with disabilities? And I said, you don't want to be taken care of. what people with disabilities really want is to have the supports in place so that you can reach your full potential and be able to be self-sufficient and take care of yourself. And I think that that's really where we need to differentiate as conservative women, that we do care, it's just a different approach.
If I may, though, I would say that the vast bulk of what you said applies to all women running. So a few of you have heard me say this. I used to do a weekly media availability. I was on TV a lot. I will tell you, all my suits became solid colors. I would not be wearing this so that your film could see it, because that jumps all over the place. I got comments. I would get more email, more connected, whatever, across the state than any other member of the Senate, Republican or Democrat, and a lot of it was about my appearance. I had somebody who worked for me on a session-only basis. 3 weeks into it, she said, "Do you have any idea how many people comment about your hair? Like, you have a fair and hair club." But I got my hair cut shorter than it's been in 20 years. If I had done that, that's all I'd be hearing about right now. And the issue about being assertive and being confident versus being shrill, or the B word, among other things, it ends up affecting an awful lot of women. And the last election that I ran in 2012 was the first time I'd ever have an ally group literally ask me, "What are you going to do about being a woman? And are you the right face?" Those are all code for about being women. So I think regardless of politics, a challenge for women in general is trying to overcome some of those kinds of things. Or at least I've experienced that.
Go ahead, Olivia.
I don't need a microphone. These are for our two local government women. I was just wondering what your biggest challenges that you faced while you've been in office that you think can be attributed to gender.
When I first came on the county board, I was the lone conservative, and I was coming on to a county board of good old boys who had pretty much ruled that county board for 20 years, and most of them were my parents' age, and I just wasn't welcomed. And it was definitely a challenge. You know, comments made to me that the biggest mistake that ever happened in this country was when they gave women shoes and they gave women the right to vote. I mean, literally, my colleagues made comments like that. And to just continue to remain strong and say, you know what, I am going to continue to do my job and do it in the best way possible. You know, the first time that I voted against a budget, the chair of the board pulled me aside and said, "Sivarajah, we don't do those kind of things around here." I think the biggest challenge was really as a new person coming in and having the strength to say, you know, I was elected to actually represent my constituents and not be a rubber stamp for the rest of you. Certainly was a challenge, and I tell you, there would be times where I would keep it together until I got in my car, and I'd lose it then. But I had to keep my composure because I couldn't let them know that they were getting to me.
So I was thinking about a few different stories. I mean, you know, this is an area, if you're going to win, you have to get, if you're a Democrat, you got to get all the Democrats, you got to get all the independents, and you got to get an awful lot of Republicans. So both male and female, they're actually, if you add them up, there's still more Republican women than there are Democratic women. So, you know, just even getting elected, I will tell you, as a woman, for some people, that was a little bit of a challenge. But in office, an example, I would say there were many things. I've worked in many different kinds of situations, have worked quite closely with men, and there were a lot of things that didn't surprise me in terms of, okay, they still remember I know about things. They're still willing to work with me. They know I work bipartisanly. But there is definitely still like some unstated pecking order and a little bit of that old boys type of club. So an example would be, at one point I was in a leadership meeting myself, the other person who was in leadership with a key chair, this happened to be a man, really good person, but you would think I didn't exist in the room. It wasn't just that he was ignoring me. I was invisible. I was entirely invisible, and women still have some invisibility issues. And this happened more than once, so I finally pulled him aside and said, look, I don't privately, I don't know if you're doing this on purpose or if you really are not recognizing it, but I am a key part of this body of our making progress, and I expect to be treated seriously. I'm not a junior partner. And that was partially in fact because I hadn't been there that long. Trying to change the status quo, I think we both have had some experience with that, kind of that whole uppity thing, kind of like, well, we want you here, but do you really, how many changes do you want to make? Another example I would give, though, is there was a Senate reunion, an all-Senate reunion while I was in office, a very great gathering, and men and women had worked on this together. But I got to tell you, if you hadn't been in office before 2002, you definitely didn't exist. And a lot of the pictures they were showing up because, until 72, there were no women there, and it was very lonely for a lot of women. You could tell the different leadership styles of women when there was a lot of women. Maybe we'll talk about the tipping point when you have a certain amount of women in a body, but. What was amazing to me is that the main story that got told about these incredible women, tax chairs and others, just was that, that here's 3 things that really had changed. Pantsuits on the floor, women wearing pants on the floor, a women's bathroom down the hall, and about paying attention to domestic violence. And I just so really? You didn't know there was domestic violence before women got here? And that wasn't that long ago. And so I think part of the challenge sometimes is people can get kind of in a rut, and it's hard making those kinds of changes. And I am worried that you're going to walk away saying, I don't ever want to do this, because you should do it. So hopefully we'll get to some positive things too.
I'd actually like to ask, and this is both for the Senator and the Commissioner, but also for the students, how do you think our political system at whatever level would be different if more women were elected to office?
Well, I'll be happy to, I will tell you, we actually hit 40%, just over 40% when I was in the Senate, and it was the first time ever in our state that we had half and half of the conference committee chairs, because when laws go through the legislature, each, the House and the Senate have, their bills, and then they come together, they have committees that resolve the differences, and then you go back. Having half of the conference committee chairs being women did make a difference, in part because of how they approach things. There was things with education that may never have happened. There was things, frankly, with some economic development kinds of things. And around the world, we have plenty of places, I'm very proud to be an American, but there's plenty of places that have way more women in office. We don't have any county commissioners in our 4-county area that are women. None. Zero. Zilch. And when you start having legislative, school boards, and others reflect the population that's around, it makes a difference. But in general, you can tell that you start seeing some different ways of doing work, and you start seeing people coming together more. And that is really hard when all the nonsense in the media is about we should all hate each other. And I think that's one of the ways that women work differently. And if I could really quickly, I talked to one of my former colleagues, a really wonderful woman, the other day, who was just saying how hard it was, that she was in trouble back with her party. She's Republican back in her district because she was supporting a really critical bonding project for her community, and she was surprised that she was under fire. And then she also said that in committee that nobody on either side wanted to talk about anything anymore because they were afraid of what was going to happen back home. I think if we have more women, that we can respectfully listen more and hear hear each other's perspectives, and perhaps say, all right, let's cut out this part of the garbage. Let's move in a different place.
I always say I don't have the market on ideas, but if everybody brings their ideas to the table, ultimately we're going to come out with a much better product in the end. And I think that's exactly what women bring to the process, and I think it would be maybe less polarized. I think there would be a lot more things actually getting done if there were more women involved in the process, because I think that too many times it becomes all about power and how you're going to move up the ladder. And for me, this has never been about power. It really has been about what can I do to make a positive difference in the community? What can I do to make sure that this continues to be the best place on earth to live for my kids, so that as they grow and, you know, the one's in college and one is in high school, that they have the same sort of opportunities that I've had in this great country. And so I think that that really would make a huge difference.
What about the students?
Yeah, I was going to say it's been really fun to have 3 female leaders of the political clubs on campus, and I think we've worked really well together. Obviously, we don't agree on a lot of things, but I think I've talked to a lot of professors who have said that before with College Dems and College Republicans, it was so far apart and the clubs really didn't collaborate well. And I would say that we've done a lot of cool things this year, trying to just like advertise the fact that there's 3 women leaders, and hopefully in the future we'll have more women that want to step up.
Yeah, I agree a lot with Bridget. You know, I think the track record we have here at college kind of speaks for itself too. And plus, I think just including more women just offers a more of a unique perspective and more a better perspective of the country as a whole.
I just personally think that we're always going to be better off when our elected bodies are more representative of the actual communities that they represent.
I have another question from the crowd. Introduce yourself first, okay?
Okay, hi, I'm Madison. I'm a first-year political science and Hispanic studies double major. And my question isn't necessarily just geared towards bennies, but I guess it applies to Johnnies as well. Sometimes it can seem very intimidating and daunting to hear the phrase, like, involved in politics. You think you have to, like, go door knocking or help someone in their campaign or run for office. So what are things that we can do that don't, that might not intimidate people as much, I guess?
Well,
Should we just scratch the mics or?
Every campaign has opportunities, so there's something for everyone. And so a lot of people don't like to door knock, or they don't like to call people on the phone, but maybe they are extremely creative and they could design literature, or maybe they're a very gifted writer. I mean, there are opportunities for people to use their time and talents in so many different ways. And it could even be just when it comes to time to vote or at precinct caucuses, giving somebody a ride. There are lots of people who, you know, even need transportation to get to and from places. So using so many different skills that you have, there's something for everyone in the political realm.
I think one of the things too is helping people with training to overcome some of their fears. I can remember at one point in time, I thought, there's no way in heck, and it wasn't that long ago, that I'm going to want to go talk to people door to door. Maybe I'll go drop lit. The problem isn't dropping lit. It's not very effective. You know, there's no individual contact. If you and I can look at each other and I can say, oh, look, there's this nice person here, you know, that can make a difference. So part of one of the things that I've done, and I recommend if people, this is on the campaign side, and very much agree with you with everything else, is that, you know, take somebody to go door to door with you, help them get some training. I'm a policy wonk. I love policy. I was so afraid, like, how would I get to enough doors? They're all going to want to talk about things. And somebody finally said, oh, it's like meeting and greeting. What you really are is making sure they connect. And it's like, oh, I can do that. And that actually brought it down for me. We got to the point in my local Senate races where at least 80% of people who donated money actually door knocked once at least. We would do a dig district door knock, so we try to make it fun and we pair people up. And locally, I would say that we even had a higher number. But there's absolutely people who are so introverted that would be painful. We don't want to make this painful for people. We want it to be fun. The other thing is it's not just about elections. It's also about advocacy on things you care about. You can make a simple sending an email, calling or talking to your legislator, following up with a note. Those kind of simple things can make a real difference as well.
So for the students then, besides, like, if you're not someone that wants to maybe get involved directly in a campaign, what can you do to be involved in politics and what's going on in the country?
Come to things like this and learn about what's going on. And also, I was just going to say, I think to be involved in any of our clubs, at least I feel this way for college gems. Like, you don't need to be a hardcore liberal or conservative. Like, you might be really passionate about the environment. And so go talk to people about, what you care about with that. Also, there's a lot of, like, nonpartisan, like, voter mobilization. Like, get out the vote is so much fun. Like, we'll go around and just get students to be voting, which is so important. And then they can have their voice be heard. You don't necessarily have to be talking about kind of intimidating political issues, but just, like, civic engagement and getting people involved is good.
Or even just reading the news. I mean, I know that sounds kind of silly, but I think part of the reason why people are so hesitant to get into, like, political organizations or politics in general is just because, like, it seems so icky and scary, but if you know a little bit more about it, then it's not so bad.
And I think a large part of our meetings is just coming to learn about other people's ideas in the party, whether they're Republican or Democrat. We've had, I know at our meetings, I'm sure it's like that for the college Democrats too, we have people from both sides come. And we really just bounce off ideas off each other, share what we think, and maybe come what we think would be the best solution to some of the problems facing the country.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions from the crowd? Quiet group. I think we have touched on this a little bit, but I want to go back to what role do you think the media plays in particularly women's campaigns? And I guess this is both for those who've been in elective office and those who haven't. So even if you've just studied this or looking from the outside, what do you think what role the media plays?
Well, one of the things that's challenging in congressional races is the media only wants to talk about how much did somebody raise at the end of any quarter. And that sometimes may be the only story that's out about somebody, and that really has nothing to do with how they would do in office or what they know. I think that we already touched on the appearance piece. They definitely still do more about that. She looked tired, whatever it is, so there's that piece. I think it's probably part of a broader conversation in terms of the media, but every media entity has gotten cut back, so they're not doing the kind of coverage that they used to do. There used to be more political coverage. Dan just got endorsed on Sunday. The Times reporter that covers our races that we'll be covering, that will be one of the main races, wasn't even there. So a lot of times they're not showing up at different things, or there's some story where they never came back and got the viewpoint of the candidate. They had somebody else, and then an editorial board starts writing a thing based on something somebody else said, and they've never talked to anybody. And so I think that's trouble or challenging. And then I personally think, and this happens on more than one network, that editorial-based news has created some additional challenges for us, and we see it in a variety of ways. And women end up getting impacted more than men in that, I believe. I mean, I think that's created some more, at least, again, that's what I've experienced.
Could you give me an example of what editorial-based news, how would that impact women more than men?
Well, first off, a lot of who they have on their shows, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of how to do my elevator speech on this one, because we could be here for a while on it. In part because they often will focus on either how they are, excuse my term, babying a woman up or not, and how attractive she's looking. There are some stations that do make up for one party and not the other. If you're a woman, that kind of does impact how you look. There are other stations, again, that either diminish, I would say, one woman of a party over another, and I think that's a problem. I suppose in the 2010 race, I mean, obviously in running against Michelle Bachmann at the height of the Tea Party, that it ended up being, I think, unfair for her how she was often characterized. And you were not seeing men necessarily portrayed in the same way. And I would say that it was harder for me as a challenger to actually get coverage. And so it's not really the challenger thing. I'm just trying to figure out how to best state it, because the adjectives that get ascribed to you and the things they tend to focus on are very surfacey. I'm somebody who has a lot of experience. I have a lot of experience. You never heard anybody talking about my experience. You know, you heard people talking about other stuff. And I think that goes back to what you were saying. And when you've got, whether it's some of the shows on MSNBC or on Fox that are kind of just trying to counter each other's talking points and bringing on people who are going to counter each other's talking points, that's not real dialogue, but that becomes a story. And they may, again, without coming and talking to you directly, take what your opponent is saying, and then somehow that gets on a blog, and then it goes on another blog, and it goes on another website, and now it's a story. And that becomes the truth instead of ever talking to you. And that happens a lot now, and I think that does go back to them not having the bandwidth.
I think that another part of the problem with the media is that we're still talking about just the fact that, like, women are running. So instead of talking about, like, people's stances on issues and all that stuff, it's, oh, cool, like, a woman's running in this district now, which it is cool, but that's not what we should be focusing on.
I would say that that certainly is very true, and going back to what Tarryl was talking about, you're right, the media really focuses on the whole issue of money. And, you know, so many times I just think we complain about what's happening, but we allow the money to continue to be what drives it. And elections really shouldn't be bought. It should be about ideas and about what's possible. And too many times I think that they focus on, like you said, the money, but they don't actually drill down and look at the details and say, well, geez, somebody raised a lot of money, but boy, they spent all of it as well. So there really isn't anything left there. And so you do definitely see that much more. I think that even with just in general, the coverage with Michelle Bachmann, if she said something that wasn't quite right, boy, the media just ran with it and they just went after her. We've had male candidates who have said all sorts of things, and it's a one-day story, and it's gone. So where you continue to hear the same statements that Michelle Bachmann made, played over and over and over again. And so I think that they're less forgiving when women make mistakes when they make comments.
Yeah, I saw this a little. I think you made a good point earlier today about how women can be perceived as overly aggressive. I was looking into interning in a female senator's office, and I was kind of asking around, like, just to get a feel for what it may be like. And many people were telling me, like, oh, don't work for her. Like, she runs tight ship. She's bitchy. Like, I heard that over and over. And I was talking to a woman who had just worked for her and then worked for Obama, is probably going to, like, rule the world someday. But she was telling me, she was like, Bridget, I guarantee if that female senator wasn't a female, people wouldn't be saying that about her. So I think that politics can be intimidating because when women take these leadership roles or, like, really take a stance on something, they're perceived a certain way, and the media definitely plays a role in that.
Yeah, I agree, but I think the media, too, is kind of a double-edged sword. It also presents an opportunity for us to actually learn the facts. A lot of us, I think, can tell or see through a lot of the misconceptions that are construed, especially with Michelle Bachmann. I always think of Sarah Palin, because I think she was really blown out of proportion on a lot of statements she said. But then there are also a lot of news sources that will carry the actual story, and if you can find those, I think it's important to follow those news sources as well.
We have a question right here.
What has your party done specifically, or what do you think we should all do to get more women involved in politics?
Ask a woman. I mean, I would say ask somebody you respect to go run for office. Be willing to run yourself. I mean, we could talk about parties. I mean, I was telling somebody earlier that, you know, parties have done different things at different times, and you know, I would say that there's that sometimes that has been an exploitation of women candidates for other reasons, other power reasons. Sometimes that's been a shell of a support. Well, yes, we're for women, but we're not really going to do anything to support women. And so from a female, whether it's campaign workers or managers or communications people, there can be some challenges as women. But having said that, going back to what the three of you have said, there are really great opportunities to modify and change things by being involved, having good. I was kind of wondering if you have the men's gallery over here, having great men and women working together and having more women engaged. But truly, part of how you keep changing it is stepping up and saying, yes, I'm willing, and then thinking about somebody you invite. So if you're feeling intimidated about going door knocking, would you feel intimidated by telling a friend, look, I think you should run for office? But those are two of the biggest things.
Definitely having that support system and that encouragement. And some of the people that have encouraged me the most to run are men who have seen the things that I've been able to accomplish, that they were frankly very surprised that I actually hung in there and was tough and was able to do those things. And so I appreciate the fact that there are a lot of men out there who recognize that and have been willing to, give that support and encouragement. I think sometimes women can be harder on other women than even men can be.
I'd like to ask how did you come, both you and Tarryl, I guess this is a question for you. Did somebody ask you to run? Did you run yourself? And who was it who asked you to run, if somebody asked you?
Actually, when I was working at the county, as I mentioned, I was a frustrated taxpayer, had been promoted to become a supervisor, and still had no power to change things. And so I had some of my coworkers that encouraged me. They were women, but then I had some people out in the community that once there was an open seat, called me up and said, your area, it's an open seat. You really should consider running. And so, no, actually, I was not affiliated with any political party. Well, even though it's a nonpartisan office, but I was not affiliated with any political party. In fact, I didn't even know what I was, to be honest with you. I just decided to jump into that open county commissioner seat, went out and knocked on doors and shared with people what was important to me. It wasn't until about 3 weeks before the general election, someone introduced me to a local Republican who asked me a whole host of questions and said, well, you're a Republican. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm not anything. And he said, well, I'm conservative, but you're way more conservative than I am. And so that's actually how I got connected with the Republican Party. My grandmother was very active in the DFL party, but my family was not active in politics at all. I always said my dad voted third party because he didn't like either party, and my mom voted for the person. And so that's really how I ended up involved.
So, Tarryl, who asked you to run?
Well, I was definitely intimidated in some ways about the whole thing. I mean, I was never going to run for office, not because I didn't think I'd do a good job, but the process of getting elected itself was partially what I said about, how much time would it be at the door, and would everybody expect long answers on everything. And I had kids that I wasn't sure how it would affect them, among other things. And I also lived in an area that's like, really? Like, what? I didn't grow up here. My grandparents aren't from here. My great-grandparents aren't from here. So there was some of those concerns. But so I figured I had stamped on my forehead appointed official, that would be my way. I would end up doing something from a regular public service. Or the thing I could see, because I think it's such an important job, is county commissioner at some point. There's a broad nexus of issues that I really care about, and that's a very important job. And but what happened, like I said, in part was I had been helping get others involved and helping others run for elections. I had spent my life working non or bipartisanly, and it was really uncomfortable. Not to say that I hadn't eventually had a party affiliation. I did. As a matter of fact, I remember my grandmother, who was two things, Episcopalian and Republican. The first time I went to a state DFL convention, I called her up and said, I think I have good news for you. And I said, I'm going to be a state delegate. And she said, well, that doesn't really mean you're a Democrat. I'm like, well, it kind of does. And to me, no one party's got the right answers or anything. What it is about bringing people together. So I was concerned about having a label attached. And that is one of the things that happens when you run for partisan office. You automatically have a whole bunch of viewpoints ascribed to you that you may or may not actually hold, and that you aren't going to work with anybody besides your party. But I have been doing a lot of advocacy at the Capitol. I was running the State Community Action Partnership at the time. And I started having people separately from my job, because it was definitely a nonpartisan job, saying, including some Republican legislators, saying you should run for office. But what happened was I had somebody who, for 4 months in a row, pretty much every day, bugged me about it. And at first I had a long reason about why no.
Was it a male or?
It was a male. And actually I had a bunch of women too, because as like a lot of women do, I started talking to some other people. Well, not that other people hadn't done, but this particular persistent person was a male. And every single day, every weekday anyways, 4 months. And at first it was like, I have this long list, no. It's like, am I not saying no appropriately? Like how, no, I'm not, no. And it was somebody related to the party. And eventually, I must have really been sending a different message, because then I started thinking about, well, how would you overcome it? And part of it was my family and I, my husband and our sons, we together decided if I was going to do this, we had to agree I was running more than once, because we did not believe I could possibly win the first time. And I ran a great race and I came close, but that meant we had to agree as a family. And so it was through a whole lot of other people being there for me. And I would say that over time, too, it's not about just that initial ask. I think this is probably true for men as well, but particularly for women, having a good supportive network around you can really buffer a lot of the garbage that gets thrown at you.
So to the students, what do you think the party should do to get more women in office, or are there other things? Was that your question? What should the parties do? Yeah.
Or us in general.
Or us in general. So what do you think needs to change? What do we need to do?
Well, SFCT isn't like really officially affiliated with a party, but one thing that I've seen through my thesis research was actually how well the Democrats mentor like incoming women and recruit and all of that kind of stuff that Republicans don't necessarily do as well. And so I think that increasing that on both sides would, only benefit everyone.
I think it's important to make our group more inclusive. I think right now there's definitely this perception that we're a very exclusive group. But I think a lot of the issues that Republicans care about actually resonate with many people throughout the country. So I think it's important to educate people, explain what these issues are, and what the party really thinks about it.
Well, like I said, there's always kind of been women in college dems, but I think it's important, like the things we've talked about with dialogue, that all of us can work on with women who are running, or just powerful women in general, watching like what people are saying, and like, is it because she's a woman that we're saying that, would be important.
Okay, I think we have a chance for one more audience question, so go ahead.
So I think a big problem for women in politics and in the private sector is the balance between work and like your family. So could you speak a little bit about how you deal with that?
Sure. When I first got involved in politics, my daughter was in kindergarten. And so that was my main concern. My son was about in 3rd grade. And so it really is a family commitment. It was a family decision to get involved in that first race. And each and every race, it really is a family decision and a family commitment. And so having their support is really critical to success, because you have to make sure that you're all cohesive. I always make sure that I set Sundays aside. That has traditionally not been a day that I've not knocked on doors on Sundays. in the past. That's really been a family day and what I hold, near and dear to, important to me. In addition, if there are events that are really important in my kid's life, they come first. That takes priority, and I'm there for them. And I think that that's important for people to see that, no matter what, they're going to be first. And I think people see that and respect that because that's what they would expect in their family. And I think that that's important as well.
But would they expect it of a male politician?
No.
I don't think we'd even ask a male politician that question. We wouldn't. Would you even think of it?
Right. Well, although I do think it's been interesting to watch some things change. If you truly do look, I'm going to say legislatively as opposed to Congress because that's their own thing. And when locally, there tend to be a lot of women that can run for school boards, or at least Minnesota has a good tradition. And there's lots of different, whether it's a school board, county board, city council, township, legislative. Those are all important jobs. They're not, some might make you think that there's a pathway up. That's not, I don't believe that's accurate. There's a lot of important ones. So if being near where your kids are is a really important thing, then doing something that you don't have to drive really far to might be good. But there's a good reason why, if you look in the legislature, you really don't see many women that have kids that are still at home, maybe older high school, but that passed between Rochester and St. Cloud. And that's partially because it would be really hard to get home for activities, among other things. Hasn't been the case with men, although I will tell you that some of that's really changing. Former Representative Haas, big part of the reason why he stopped being a legislator is because they have two small kids, and it was really killing him to be away, and it was hard for their family. And it also used to be that the family would all come down. The people like from northwestern Minnesota or northeastern, they would come down. The kids would be in two different school districts. They all would live there, and they go back. And part of me is like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't want that one. But that assumes that means you have only one person is working outside the home, and so our dynamics have changed. And I think part of what needs to happen for this balance is that legislative bodies have to start trying to figure out how to do some things differently. It was critically important that we had the ability. You got a housing allowance if you live more than 50 miles away, for me to be able to be there during session. But it also meant that like you were saying, I'd leave if we had something going on. And our kids, where our impact, because like I said, it was a family decision, I started in terms of running and being involved in that way. Our kids were in junior high, and we did go door knocking together, and one of them loved it and one of them hated it, and we had to negotiate about movies and other things, and then we had to respect where their own strengths were. And because at the end of the day, you hope that your kids are going to have strong values and not feel like you have imposed something else on them. And I think that's one of the things that's hard too from a family standpoint.
I just have one last question, and that is, what advice would you give to college-aged women who express interest in going into politics? So I guess your advice to the people on either side of you.
Well, I am just so impressed that they're involved at this young age. I only wish that I had been involved at an early age. So, kudos to you on that. Stay involved. You have already had some wonderful experiences. I know many of you have assisted on campaigns and other things, but I think that the more women that we have serving in elected office, then other young women will see that that's something that they can also aspire to. And so I would encourage you to consider running for office. And if you don't want to run for office yourself, make sure that you're identifying others who maybe would be really good in office and encouraging them to go for it, because that is the only way that we are truly going to be able to change the dynamics.
Well, right now, you may think you have to wait until you're out of school. There are local, whether it's school district or city or county, there are committees and task forces, boards you could serve on. I will tell you that many public groups are always looking for younger people to participate. They are desperately trying to figure out how to do that. So I will tell you, that goes back to the whole thing about 90%, who shows up. If you say you want to be involved, do that. You've had 2 former mayors who have come out of this fine institution right out of college. You might want to think about whether or not it's mayor. It might not be mayor. There have been a number of legislators in their 20s that have come in to office. I mean, you don't want any group board to be the same demographics of everybody, but we do need more young people. So you don't necessarily need to wait. But I was thinking too, when I was thinking about each of you, especially if you're thinking, well, I don't really see this necessarily in my cards, I've contemplated, like I said, I'm a walking example of, I pretty much shut that door. And so I've learned you never say never, because you may know. So I guess in addition to the advice you gave, look for boards or other things that interest you. If you're interested in the environment, there's also cool parks and trails organizations. Get involved in some things. Go volunteer in schools. Get something where you're getting some experience and you're able to listen and learn from what's going on. And then, like we both have said, please consider running, and please encourage others to do so. And I suppose I'm going to add my third ask, which is either let somebody in office know something about an issue that's important to you, and take, as the second part of it, or stretch yourself and say, I'm really scared or intimidated by this thought about campaigning either for an issue or a person, but I'm going to find somebody to go with me and I'm going to try it.
Thank you so much for everybody. I really appreciate your time.
We hope you enjoyed yourself. Quick 2 plugs. We have 2 really awesome events coming up after Easter break. We have another Politics in a Pint that's going to be on the tax code on April 23rd. And we have an upcoming study tour that we're co-sponsoring with the CSVSU Econ Club. And that's going to be a tour of the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis. So check your emails for advertisements on those events. Once again, thank you to our panelists. I have bags of gifts for all of you to help you represent the McCarthy Center, since you represent